56. The thing is that this is a continuation of the mimer we just learned, and in fact, many of the themes will be repeated. But that was such a knockout mimer that the Rabbi gave, and the Sikha that followed, that it became sort of a standard, basic description of Hasidus that stands on its own. So that mimer that we learned about Yud Tes Kislev, a Sikha followed it that the Rabbi gave, which, as we said before, was printed in its own kuntris in Yonush Shel Torah Chasidus. It's called. What is Chasidus? And it became like a widely dispersed kuntris, which explains what Chasidus is compared to the other parts of the Torah and how it affects the world. And it became like very big. So anyway, the following Fabrengen, the Rebbe continued on that theme, and this is the mimer we're going to learn now. This is a Hanukkah mimer. So we'll just start. Lahavin inyan Neros Hanukkah. To understand the concept of Neros Hanukkah, Chasidus. Thanks, David.
No problem.
The Hagam she Neros Hanukkah. Even though the candles of Hanukkah tiknu mipnei hanes shahaya b'neros hamikdash, that they affixed and established the Hanukkah miracle because of the nes that happened in the mikdash, in the menorah that was in the mikdash. So it's clearly connected with the menorah of the mikdash. And called the tikkun rabbanin kein d'oraisa tikkun. Everything that the rabbanin made as a new law and established a new law in Israel, the rabbis came along in a later generation. They always did it in such a way that it was based exactly on something from the Torah itself. They wanted to keep it as similar and as possible. Makom, nevertheless, harihem chalukim bekam inyanim. Nonetheless, the menorah of Hanukkah and the menorah of the temple are different in many ways. So, and he enumerates them. B'misparam, first of all, they're different, of course, in their number. That the menorah of the mikdash hayu zayin neros. There was only 7 candles in the mikdash. Neros Hanukkah hem shmone, whereas Hanukkah has 8. And then a second place where they differ, makom amidasam, where you stand them. The menorah has to be bifnim, betocha kodesh, ubedarom yamin. So there's already a few details in this one. That the place of the menorah in the mikdash was specifically inside the mikdash, what we call betocha kodesh. So the mikdash itself had basically 3 sections, 2 rooms. The inner room was called the Holy of Holies, and in there was only the Ark. And the outer room, right out of that, was called the Holy, the Kodesh, and it had the menorah, the Shulchan, and another little mizbeach of gold. And the menorah was therefore inside the room. And it was B'darom. It was specifically in the south, or what we call the right side. Why is the south called right?
Chesed.
Why is the south called right?
Chesed. Shkina.
Okay, so the south is called Chesed. Why is it called Chesed and not Gevurah?
When you enter the Beis Hamikdash, it's like Shkina's on the south side.
No.
No, it's
when
on
you
the
enter
right
the
side.
Beis Hamikdash,
Right
no.
No.
When you enter the Beis Hamikdash, you're in the east,
Oh.
and then so you're looking towards the west, and when you're looking straight towards the curtain of the Holy of Holies, so it says Shechina b'marav. Shechina is standing in the west. Right? The God, if you go to the building, God is basically standing, so to speak, in the Holy of Holies, looking out towards the people that come in, so to speak. That's like the direction of the thing. So the idea is that, therefore, to his right is south, and to his left is north.
Okay, yeah.
You get that?
Yeah.
So if you're standing in the west, then to the right is south, and to the left is north.
Yeah.
Okay, so that the menorah, therefore, was the south side, and that's therefore called the right side. In other words, right in what context? If you're Hashem standing in the west, then on your right side would be south. But you're right, south represents Chesed, and in other words, the right side. Whereas the Neros Hanukkah, they had the opposite. Mitzvah la'anicha mibachutz, right? Pesach beso mibachutz, it says in the Gemara. You have to specifically put them outside your door. So the exact opposite of the mikdash, but they had to be inside. And bismol, they also go on the other side. They go on the left specifically, not the right. Mezuzah biyamin, ner Chanukah mismol. Right. So basically, even though the rabbis tried to make all their laws exactly like Deraisa, here they, in a very exaggerated way, made major changes to the point of making opposite of how it was in the Mikdash. That's two levels of difference: their number and their place. Then there's a third one: Bizman hadlakasa, the time that you light them. The nerus hamikdash hadliko miplag hamincha. That in the temple, when do they light the candles? From plag hamincha, which is basically during the day, about an hour and 15 minutes before shkia, before the sun goes down. Meshech zman shav revia, about a good measure of time, an hour and a quarter, kodem shetishka cham, before the sun goes down. V'ner Hanukkah, whereas the ner Hanukkah mitzvasahi mishetishka chama, you're not allowed to light it before the sun starts to go down. There's different opinions at the beginning of the shkia, at the end of the shkia, and to this day Jews do different things, but everyone agrees that you're not allowed to light it when it's still definitely day, right? What does shkia represent? It represents the introduction of a little strange period of time called Bein Hashmashos, which is twilight, where it's Safek Yom, Safek Laila, right? It's no longer day, it might be night. And we have to therefore take upon ourselves all kinds of stringencies when it comes to Shabbos, etc., because we have to assume that it's night. So it's already not day for sure. Can't say that it's 100% night for sure, but we can say it's 100% not day. And nonetheless, that's when you have to light the Hanukkah candles. Some people say it's at the end of that period, which means it has to be mamish night. You have to light the candles at Tzeisa Kochavim, when the stars come out. That's the beginning of the lighting time. And others have the minhag, and we have the minhag of doing it at the beginning of the shkia. But anyway, however it is, it's not day. Whereas the candles of the mikdash had to be lit dafka in the day, and a good portion into the day, an hour and a quarter, when it was still day mamish.
On Shabbos, you were talking about the leftists, the liberals, whatever, that are all lovey-dovey, but
right.
They're really gavor. Left, is like gavor.
Right. Oh, on the left side.
Yeah, left side.
Yeah.
And you see that they're kind of gavor, about things that
The Haredim on the left.
Yeah.
And the right side, like Chesed,
The Chassidim. Whoa. Yeah. There's Levi. There's your own. You're trickling in. Okay, so those are three major differences. Again, number, place where you put them, and their time of lighting them. Umosef Kvod Kedushas Mordechai Admor, the Frierdiker Rebbe, my father-in-law, he adds Behemshech Parah B'Shalom in the year Tafshin Dalid, he adds in a mimer there Od Diuk Bazeh, one more difference. Shener Chanukah Mitzvah Nicha Mibachutz. He says there's not like we already mentioned this, but he adds a point that you have to put the Ner Chanukah outside. Delo matzinu mitzvah. We don't find any other mitzvah milvad para aduma except for the one para aduma, which is itself has all kinds of drushas why this is found outside. Shetzrich lios b'chutz. That needs to be done outside b'reshus harabi, in the external thoroughfare, the domain of the many. In other words, that all mitzvahs are done inside. In other words, there's no such concept of setting up a mitzvah that l'chatchila it's done in the public thoroughfare. And the only one is, especially when it comes to everything having to do with the mikdash, it was connected with the mikdash. So all the sacrifices were inside, and all the the libations and everything that was done, except paradum was taken to a nearby mountain where they burned it. They just had to sort of have this mikdash in sight, but it was done outside. And here now you have Ner Chanukah. It was established specifically by the Rabbanan that it should be outside the house, in the Reshus HaRabbi. Reshus HaRabbi, there's a bit of a... Yeah, see that? We're learning the Gemara right now. Kashitas HaTosafos. Rashi doesn't hold that. We learned this in the Gemara. Rashi holds that Mi Pesach Beisim B'chutz means it should just be towards the courtyard, outside of your house, but into your courtyard. Into the courtyard. But Tosafos learns that it should be mamish outside your courtyard, into the Reshus HaRabbi, outside the house mamish. Okay, anyway, so that's special al Hanukkah. Umevar ba'hemshech.
It's cool.
It's interesting. Now you see the sort of real kunz of Tosfos there. In other words, he's making a big chiddush by saying Rashi makes sense. Why would we assume? There's two ways you can learn the Gemara. and there's no reason to push yourself into saying that it's dafka Rishus Harabim. So you can see Tosfos took like a big jump that he made this mitzvah different than almost every single other mitzvah there is, except for Parah Aduma. So that's what we learned from Tosfos. Anyway, Mivar ba Hemshech. So in that Hemshech from the previous Rebbe, he explains that Tam bepashtus al zeshaner Hanukkah, who mibachutz, that the simple reason why the Hanukkah candle is, so to speak, outside and differs, hu bishvil pirsumei nisa. It's the obvious reason because you want to publicize the miracle, right? Mm-hmm. He explains this. This is why it differs from all of the miracles. But there's a big problem with that. This seemingly is not a sufficient reason to make your mitzvah outside. Why?
What's l'chora?
Seemingly. Gam hanes de Purim mefarsamim al yedei mishta shel simcha u'mishloach manus u'matanos levyonim. Right? Because Purim also has a mitzvah of pirsumei nisa. Right? Part of the mitzvah of Purim, and the reason we do many of the mitzvahs, is to publicize the miracle. It's like beferush in the halacha, just like Hanukkah has an Indian of publicizing the miracle. So to Purim, and we don't find that Purim you have to do anything outside. Right? You're able to, the way the halacha tells us to do to pirsumei nisa through Purim is to make us a mishta shel simcha, to make a festive meal. You don't do it outside. You don't publicize it. It's in your house. Mishloach manus. In other words, you're giving each other food. In other words, it's an inside job.
But wait, that seems outside.
It doesn't have to be outside. It says you can give mishloach manus. You can just sit at your meal. You can trade one for the other.
Running through the streets with gifts for each other.
No,
but that's your business. You want to sit in your house and people will come into your house and you'll give them mishloach manus there. Then that you've definitely fulfilled the mitzvah and you fulfill the mitzvah of pirsumei nisa.
You don't have to do it
No
outside.
one tells you anywhere that you have to go outside. That's what you want to do because it's a nice day outside. Matanos levyonim, you give to the poor. Who's talking about pirsumei nisa? Like you have to go outside and give it. You can invite the poor to your suda. It's anyway. I hear you. If you want to go making a big thing about it, for sure in our generation we do. We go out. We talk to people, give out grogers on the street, but that's the Rebbe's thing. In other words, to make it like a wild outside type of a thing. But in reality, there's nowhere does it says anything about outside. And Afa Pikain Ein Osim Zev Rishus Harabim. So even though it's all about pirsumei nisa, we do it not in the Rishus Harabim. So therefore, there's a big question: what's going on with Hanukkah? That has to be outside. The reason that we thought is not sufficient. Okay, so going on. Do you want a copy, by the way? All right, Levi, you want a copy?
I don't really know.
You have one?
Yeah, big
Okay.
Was Purim, though, was it publicizing a miracle?
Publicizing the miracle.
A miracle of what? The lottery?
Jews not getting killed.
Yeah.
He's not getting killed?
The salvation.
Haman not wiping out the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Oh, chuvos v'niflo sha'asisu levosinu v'yamim ahim mizman hazeh. That's what you're publicizing.
Okay, fair enough.
Sha'asan nisim levosinu.
Uh-huh.
Right? Mm-hmm. So, Nekudas Habiur, Bazeh, the point which brings all these things together, not always is so nice and neat. The Rebbe sort of just like answers all the questions that he just asked. Usually you have to wait a few months.
Yeah.
But he says, let's just sort ourselves out here. K'mavur ba'drushim, as explained in Chassidus, different Maimarim, she'inyanam shel neros Chanukah, hu lahir es hachoshech. The point of Dafka, the neros Chanukah, is to illuminate the darkness. Da'al yidei milchamas hayavanim, because through the war of the Greeks, lashkicham torasecha, that their interest was to destroy your Torah, ulavira mechukei ritzonecha, and to take away the Jews from doing the statutes of Hashem's will. This was their whole inyan, was to basically stamp out the light of Yiddishkeit. Again, we talked about it, not necessarily the light of Stam practicing Judaism, because in a sense the Greeks were multiculturalists and they appreciated everybody's culture. They sort of like had many gods and they all had their own little like way of serving them, and they were into that.
A watered down, huh?
What's that?
A watered down version.
Yeah, so long as you didn't actually think that you were serious about what you were doing. In other words, if you believed in your cause, then that was not okay, because that was already encroaching on their world domination. So basically, what do they go against? I think the Rebbe is going to for sure get into it himself, but just to clarify what we always say, Lashkicham Torah secha. In other words, it doesn't say Lashkiach HaTorah. that they wanted us to forget the Torah. They didn't want us to forget the Torah. On the contrary, Ptolemy, if that's how you pronounce his name, I think, he was the one who was the Greek leader who forced the 70 rabbis to go into a room and independently translate the entire Torah because they wanted to know what the Torah says, and the first translation of the Torah was into Greek.
Right.
And you could write a Sefer Torah in Greek.
That's right, and it says in the Gemara, Megillah, it's a holy language even. There's something, that's like a sort of a, it's interesting. It's interesting. It says that Greek is the only language that's not Lashon HaKodesh, which can authentically pass over the ideas in Torah to the point that if you write a language in Lashon Yavani, it's a kosher Sefer Torah. It's crazy.
What about Aramaic?
No.
No, not Aramaic. Only this language. Yeah. Only Greek. We're actually, so the whole story, there was sort of two Greek languages that comes out. They said because the Chachamim forbade people to speak Greek at a certain point. There was a whole sugi over there that what it comes down to is that there was like speaking Greek also got you mixing in with the higher class of the Greek officials, and that was like assimilation central. So the only few people, like the high chief rabbanim, that could go in there and sort of like fight for the Jewish people. I think it was, who was it? It was, I don't remember the sage that was allowed to do it. But they let a couple sages and his family go in there and sort of learn it, where everybody else, they already forbade this language because it caused us a lot of turmoil. But ultimately, the language itself is unique amongst the 70 languages. It has a certain beauty that allows the actual meaning of the Torah to come through.
Didn't everyone in the Sanhedrin already speak Greek? Didn't they speak other languages?
Yeah, in the Sanhedrin I guess it's different, but that's what I'm saying. They allowed it for, but the simple people were already not allowed to learn this language.
Right, I'm saying that whoever went in there was probably on the Sanhedrin because he.
Right.
Is there such a thing though of a Torah in Greek?
I don't even know.
You're saying it could be, but is there any?
No, we don't have one as far as I know. But I don't think there's not one in existence today, I don't think.
There's an Acropolis in Beis Sharim.
What is there?
An Acropolis, it's like a sort of quasi-pagan Jewish burial chamber. That's where Rabbi Yehuda is buried. It's all like ornate.
And they have their like a sefer?
No, but it's just where they were buried. It was all the rich Jewish Greeks from Alexandria were buried in Israel.
Wow.
Beis Sharim is just like Tibor near Haifa.
Hmm. Yeah, it was interesting times we went through there. But the point is that he's bringing out here that, and we say in the Al Hanisim prayer, is that what do they want to destroy? Not the Torah. They were into the Torah. They wanted the Torah to be printed and or at least written down. But they because they loved wisdom, philosophy. The Greeks and Jews have lots of it. But what they want is lashchicham Torah secha. They want us to forget your Torah, Hashem. In other words, wisdom, fine, but it has to be man wisdom. You're coming and you're saying you have this divine wisdom from God, and it's different than every other wisdom. That's what they wanted to wipe out of the world. And again, it goes la'avira michuke ritzonecho. In other words, the idea is they wanted to remove us not from doing mitzvahs, because practice. If you want to worship idols, you also have to practice to go to an ashram and do whatever they do over there. But that's different than the chuke ritzonecha, because chukim are laws that don't make sense. We have chukim, mishpatim, and edus, right? The three levels of Jewish law. Chukim are laws which the whole thing is you do them and you can't ask why. It's a chok v'lo yavor. So that's what the Greeks were after. They didn't care if we did our mishpatim. They didn't care if we did the mitzvahs that made sense, because they were like, okay, if it makes sense and it's wise, you can do it. But if it doesn't make sense, so why are you doing it? So we say because God told us, and our God is basically beyond this world. No, we don't believe in that. And so it's very specific to language. Lashkicha mitorah secha and la'avir mechuke ritzonecha. Anyway, so there was a tremendous war, and there was a huge darkness that overcame the world because the Yidden were falling prey to this left, right, and center. There was they were holding down they had the ability to withstand this. First they came and they tried to woo us with like wisdom, and then they just started killing people. And particularly after they came into the actual Beis Hamikdash and they contaminated the whole place, again, same principle, very strange. You're like a warring country, and you finally get to the the Bira, Yerushalayim and the Harabais, and like clearly the center of our whole population. What do you do over there? You don't destroy it like the Romans did. You don't burn it down. You just go in there and open up all the jars of oil. That's a very weird thing for the enemy to do. And why? Because they didn't care if we had a temple. Just, you want to have a temple in purity. What's purity? They didn't know from purity. So the fact they wanted to to contaminate, impurify, that was their issue. That we had a pure, religion, something beyond, something not from here. Anyway, so Naisa, he's gavru shachoshek dilu'umadze. Turning the page. So as soon as they came into the Heichel, specifically at that period, that's when there was a tremendous overpowering of the dark side. That basically darkness sort of took over the world to a certain degree. And therefore, therefore, when we won the war, and we overtook them militarily, tiknu neros Hanukkah. Therefore, in other words, nothing is accidental here. They made a takana, a new law, specifically in this Indian of light. In other words, if you think about it, why did they make it out of light? There was the miracle of the lights, but there was a couple other miracles over there they could have made. There was the miracle of winning the war. There was the miracle basically of the ability to dedicate the temple. There was things, but they made a miracle specifically that the miracle was to shine light. Because they knew that they needed some tool to bring the dominance of light back into the world, because the Greeks basically snuffed out the light of the world. And therefore, based on that principle, you could see that all of the rules they made around the menorah were all to amplify this one point, that we were going to light up the darkness. And that's why they made it unlike the menorah, that it has to be specifically from when it gets dark, or when the sun goes down. Because the whole point of it is that it should be in the dark to light up the darkness. So even though seemingly they would have done everything according to the menorah, you would have lit it in the day, but since they had a very serious kavanah that they were trying to brighten up the darkness, they set it up specifically that it would be at night. And then the same thing, Makam Amidasam, the place where they decided it should be put, chutz, outside, in the Reshus Harabim, right? Which basically means in the disconnected outer world, which is dark, not inside where everything's kosher and holy. And then ubismol, the left side represents the place of contraction, the place of darkness. Right is connected with light, left is connected with darkness, and the Hanukkah menorah is on the left side. Because they wanted to shine up the darkness of what we call the Reshus Harabim. What's the Reshus Harabim? In Hasidus language, Torah de Pruda, it's called the separated mountains. What is the separated mountains? So it's this whole Kabbalistic idea that as the worlds descend lower and lower and lower, the spiritual worlds, they get more and more fragmented. And there's less and less of ability to see the unity of all things. And as the worlds get sort of further and further down, everything starts to get multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. So you have like an unbelievable mass of stuff, and it's very hard to see through that and recognize that everything is unified. So the klippas, the place of disconnect, it's called the Reshus Harabim, in other words, the place of many, because that indicates that you already cannot see the unity of God. The darkness has set in. So that's where they put the Hanukkah menorah. It's dafka in the place of many. Sheyinikasam hu mikava small. And why is that connected with the left side? Because left represents contraction. Right is giving, left is withholding. So the idea is that as you get lower and lower in the world, you're withholding more and more and more light. Light is that element which binds everything together and sort of blurs the boundaries between things. The more you remove the light, the more you can see the boundaries between things, and everything becomes a plurality. So therefore it's connected with the left side, because the left side contracts the light. And therefore from the left side creates the Reshus Harabim and the concept of many. So here come the Chacham. They wanted to lighten up the darkness, so they put it on the left side and outside and at night. So it all goes together in for one reason. None of which has to do with Pirsume Nisa. Okay. V'zeu shenerus Hanukkah hem shmona nerus. And that's also why, so I told you, he answers every single question you just asked, and it's a very rare thing, and nice. It's a good to bring home to your wife in the Devar Torah there. But this is what it means, nerus Hanukkah hem shmona. So how does that connect with the fact that there's 8 candles instead of 7? Ki zeh shenerus Hanukkah me'irim es ha-choshech. Because this principle that we just said, that they have the power to light up the darkness, Gam ha-choshech derushus harabim, even a choshech, a darkness, which is this level of the public domain. In other words, where, what do you mean rushus harabim? And what's the opposite of rushus harabim? Rushus ha-yachid. What's the meaning of yachid? That the yichudu shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there. There's a spiritual concept that, of course, it plays out as actual different areas that you go into in the world, but the name says everything. The Rishus HaYachid means it's the domain and the possession of the Yichudu Shalom, that God is there. And therefore the Rishus HaRabim is, so to speak, the place God is not seen, not found. So the fact is that in order, since the Hanukkah lights were supposed to light up the darkness, even in the darkness of a Rishus HaRabim, who mivnei sha'or deneres Hanukkah, who or shalamayla mishtalshlus. And why are they able to do that? What gives them the power to do that? Because they are what's called above the Seder Ishtalshlus. What is the Seder Ishtalshlus? Ishtalshlus means comes to the word chain. And the Seder Ishtalshlus means the chain-like descent, the orderly chain-like descent of the worlds. Whereas we just said, when you go from one world to the next, the light gets contracted, and the plurality becomes more and more advanced, and basically there's an infinite chain of these lights, like a DNA strand, that it goes from a state of absolute oneness with God, and then he sort of invents the concept of worlds, that there's 10 spheros, and those 10 spheros are chaining down in sets of 10 in an infinite stream, creating different worlds and different realities. That's called the Seder Ishtalshlus. So the idea is that the number 8 represents above the Seder Ishtalshlus. Why is that? Because, basically why? Why is 8 represent above the Seder Ishtalshlus?
8 is transcendental.
Why though?
It's about 7.
7 is complete.
There's 7 days.
The Old Testament.
Right, because 7 represents nature. The world, Hashem created the world in 7 days, and when you get past the 7th day of Shabbos, there is no 8th day. You go back to 1. Because the whole order of reality that we live in is basically, it's in a box. It's like Hashem framed our reality in certain finite principles. Where does the number 7 come also? It's the idea of also time, we said, 7 days. It's also space. Because like an object, a cube, let's say, has 6 sides, and then like its center point, which creates like where it is, you know? So the whole idea of basically time and space is limited to this number 7. So the idea of 8 doesn't just represent like 1 past 7, it represents going to a reality and a realm which is beyond all the limitations of the world. That's what number 8 is, like the infinity symbol also, just the pashtus, because it's the idea of not just going one more, it's going into a new dimension where all the limitations of the reality of 7, you've sort of gone past them.
Shouldn't 8 represent Kedusha then? We say 10 represents Kedusha.
I mean, 8 in a certain level represent a certain level, certainly. I mean, all of them they represent Kedusha. It depends. Each one has a counterpart. Even 10 has a counterpart on the other side. There's the 10 spheres. In other words, when you talk about Kedusha, it says, Zelu madzeh asa Elokim. Hashem made everything with a parallel. So there's 7, it can also be holy. There's 7 branches of the menorah. It's holy. But then there's also 7 nations of Canaan, you know, who we had to destroy them because they were the unholy counterpart, you know. And 8 as well has its negativity. There's a counterpart. The only thing we're saying now is that it's beyond limitations. So you can be beyond limitations on the side of good or bad, truthfully. But the idea is that one thing that it does have the power of doing is shining up the darkness. Why is that? Because dark is basically a relative concept. What's dark is when you start creating limited worlds, the bigger your vessels, the more light you can fill in those vessels. So when you go down one world, Hashem makes the vessels smaller. Therefore, He makes the light that's able to put into them smaller. And therefore, it gets darker and darker. As you start going down then, you wind up with a very dark bottom and a very light top. But all that is basically relative. Because if you go outside of the dimension of the boundaries altogether, there is nothing that can withhold the light from being in a certain place. The only thing that we're saying which holds the light from being in a certain place is that there's a vessel which won't allow that much light to come in. But that's all within the realm of boundary, that you're dealing with a light which in general conforms to going into vessels. Therefore, if you have a bigger vessel, you have more light. A smaller vessel, you have less light. If you're dealing with a light which doesn't even, it's an infinite light, which means it doesn't get stopped by the right or the left or the up or the down. It goes on forever. So it becomes a moot point, basically, that you're going to be able to keep this light from a certain place and contain it in another place. It's unbound by the limitations of the vessels. And therefore, it has no problem being in the place of darkness, just like it has being in the place of light. Because it's beyond the whole dimensions of up and down and limitations. And this is the inyan of 8. It's called above the Seder Ishtalshalus. And since the Rabbanim were trying to light up the darkness, they had to tap into a level which was beyond, so to speak, the limitations of darkness. Because they understand what happened is that when it came to fighting a fair fight, the Greeks sort of won. They came with such a contamination, and in terms of the level of just, us trying to make bigger vessels and allow the light to come in, and them they won. They got right into the base of Mikdash and they contaminated everything. We didn't have any more vessels that could basically bring light. We lost our ability to sort of make a mishkan for Hashem in the natural, normal, orderly way of following the rules. So therefore, miracles had to happen, and the Rabbanan had to tap into something which is beyond the rules. Okay, and this is why they chose 8, because it represents above the Seder Ishtalshalus. V'lachein hem shmona neros. That's why there are 8 of them. The mispar shmona, the number 8, mora al bechina shelamayl mishtalshalus. It refers to a level which is above the Seder Ishtalshalus. That's also why, for example, the bris. You'll find, if you look through the Torah, you'll find the number 8 in every place that it pops up. It represents the same thing. But the obvious one is the bris, because what's a bris? A bris is a covenant that says that we are bound to Hashem. And when do we make this bris? Not like the Ishmaelim when they turn 13 and they sort of have an intellect in their head. Well, yeah. Why is it chas v'shalom? No, it's kind of an awesome thing that the Ishmaelites want to circumcise themselves and make a covenant with Hashem. That comes from the Torah. That we don't know the people that are Ishmaelites today are not necessarily the same people that are that we think they are. Like Arabs and Ishmaelites are not the same. But nonetheless, there's a concept that Ishmaelites, they mamish were Avram's children, and they also had a bris. But what's the difference there? He was already 13 years old by the time he had his bris, which means a 13-year-old is a person who bears intellect and free will decision making. Whereas the Jew had his bris when he was 8 days old, which means you don't know anything and you can't make a decision for yourself. And the idea is that it's above intellect, it's above reason. Our connection with Hashem is not based on anything we do or don't do, it's above reason. That's the idea that it doesn't really matter what the rules are. Even if a Jew will break every single rule in the book, which is like, according to Seder Ishtalshalus, you're making less vessels, you're having less light, you're basically going to snuff yourself out, according to the rule book, but then you have this bris, which means that Hashem's going to look down at the bris and say, oh, right, I made a covenant with you, and the covenant is that even if I don't love you, you're going to be my children. So that is beyond the Seder Ishtalshalus. That doesn't make sense rationally. And that's again the number 8. Whenever you have this thing where there's something beyond rules and beyond the orderly nature of the world, it's called the number 8.
It was interesting that science followed the Torah, because in 1954 there were some doctors and they did some research. It said that on the bris, on the 8th day, like when a child's born, there's a thing called vitamin K. And if you get a cut, what stops you from bleeding to death is this vitamin in the blood. So when you're born, it's like maybe 50%, 6 days, like 80%. On the 7th day, it's like 95%. On the 8th day, it goes 100%, and 9th day, it goes back down to 80%. So on the 8th day is the only day that's the highest, so the blood won't just pour out. So it's amazing, huh?
It is amazing. Okay, but al derech zeh hu b'nogea la Yom Tov de Hanukkah. So the same thing is true regarding the whole Yom Tov of Hanukkah. Yom Tov de Hanukkah hu b'mispar shmona. The reason that they made the number of days of Hanukkah into 8. Yom de Hanukkah Tamnya Inun, as it says in the Gemara, the days of Hanukkah are 8 in their essential nature, is Ki Hagiloi Shemeir B'Yemei Hanukkah Hu Gilu Shelamayla Mishtalshlus. It's because the whole of Hanukkah is an Inyan of 8. It represents a certain time in the calendar. We're in it right now. It's actually mamash exciting. It's something unusual and amazing that we just walked into a certain dimension where the light available to us in these 8 days is an 8. It's a light above reason, right? You could just you could take this thing, casually and just say, okay, light a few candles, but you have to realize that it doesn't happen every day. We're not always in an 8. I'll tell you the truth is, we're never in an 8. There's only one time, according to the Torah, that we walk into an 8, and it's Shmini Atzeres. And Shmini Atzeres, it's not an 8-day holiday. It's called Shmini Atzeres because there's 7 days of Sukkot, which is like its own holiday, and there's an inyan of an 8. So you capture an 8, but only for 1 day. Even the Torah has, so to speak, there are 8 days involved with this festival. It's not. The whole festival is not called an inyan of 8. The festival of Sukkot is a 7. It's just that then you get to this level of 8. But it shows you that the level of 8 that you're tapping into there isn't an 8. It's a 1, which sort of has a little chop on the concept of 8. But there's nowhere it says in the Torah there's 8 days of a holiday. Only places, the Rabbanan did that. And because they reached up to a level that was never reached in the times of the Torah. This whole thing is an 8. It's not a 7 and a 1. It's a level of 8, and for 8 whole days, we're in this realm of beyond the Seder Yishtalshus. These are miracle days. Things can happen in these days that will change your life forever because there's no rules. It's like your essential connection with Hashem, which is beyond everything that merit and the scales of justice and so forth. It doesn't matter. It's just your belovedness to Hashem shines, and therefore things which are above nature.
That's where they get the term behind the 8 ball.
Maybe. Anyway, so this is the Giloy that shines in the days of Hanukkah, is a whole revelation which is beyond the orderly nature of the world, the Seder Yishtalshlus. Okay. So basically answered all of our questions. What's all those things we said about Hanukkah? That why is it an 8 and not a 7? Why is it left and not right? Why is it in the dark and not the light? It all comes out to the same thing. They were trying to shine up the darkness, and the way to shine up the darkness is specifically with a light which is beyond the Seder Yishtalshlus, because it's not affected by the limitations of darkness. Behine or zeh, this light shelamayla mishtalshlus, which is above the Yishtalshlus, shemer b'yemei Chanukah, that shines in this time, ubefrat b'neros Chanukah. Oh, so the Rabbi adds something we should pay attention to that. Puts in a little parenthesis. He says, even though we're in an 8 right now, we're holding by an 8, which means that this whole period of time we're above the Seder Yishtalshlus. When does that really come to play? In front of the Hanukkah candles. When you actually light the Hanukkah candles, it's like the super focus on this level which is above the Seder Yishtalshlus is unleashed at that moment. Really, it's the whole 8 days. But he says, Bifrat b'neros Hanukkah. And when you actually light the candles, you're sitting in front of something miraculous. As the Mittler Rebbe said, I think it was the Mittler Rebbe, maybe the Rebbe Maharash, he said that when you look, what is the light of the Hanukkah candles? It's actually the Or HaGnuz. You heard this before? It's a crazy concept. Yeah. The Or HaGnuz was the light Hashem created on the first day that you could see from one world to the other and one end of the world to the other. Basically, it was an infinite light, the light of creation. And it was you could see through all time and space, like basically everything was revealed before you. This light was hidden, it says, for the tzaddikim. You can't just use this light. They were afraid if people had access to this light. Of course, who knows what would happen. So, but when does it shine? Inside of your Hanukkah candle. When you're looking at your Hanukkah candle, you're looking at the Or HaGanuz. Whatever it means, but that's what he's saying here. It's a Lamayla mitam v'das, Lamayla mishtalshlus. So anyway, this light. So skip the parentheses for a second, go back. Hine or zeh nimshach al yedei hamasiris nefesh b'metisyahu banav. So how did the Rabbanan unleash this light? How did they get their hands on such a light? It came from an action from the Jews' part, which is Matisyahu and his sons had this unbelievable Mesiris Nefesh. They basically were willing to do the impossible, and therefore the impossible happened to them. There's 8 guys or something, they were going to take on 12 guys, they were going to take on the entire Greek army. That's a Mesiris Nefesh. If you ever heard one.
It's pretty awesome.
Right? So the fact that they stood up and tried to do the impossible, they tapped into the impossible. Which means that the connection to this light with the darkness that was prevalent at that time is b'shnei inyanim. It expressed itself in two different ways. In other words, what's the connection of this beyond worldly light to the darkness that was prevailing? In two ways. Milamata lamayla v'lamayla lamata. The standard two ways in Hasidus, which is from below to above and from above to below. In other words, this light and this darkness had what to do with each other from these two directions. Meaning what? Milamata lamayla, from below to above. Shemitzad godel hachoshech she'az nis'ore etzlam koach hamasiris nefesh shelamayla mishtal shlusha ba'adam. So in other words, what does it mean that the light had a connection to the darkness from below to above? It means that because it was so dark, that darkness itself is what aroused them to go on such a level of masiris nefesh that reached the level of what's above the Seder Ishtalshlus in man. In other words, man himself, as we said yesterday, not everyone was here, has his own level of Seder Ishtalshlus. We have our own natural levels, which is basically doing things that make sense. We said, what is the idea of number 8? Is that it's beyond intellect. An 8-year-old gets a bris not because he chooses. So we also have our brain, and the brain rules over our powers, and everything that makes sense to us, and even certain things that maybe are going out on a limb, but we can justify them. All that is within the Seder Ishtalshlus of a person. But doing things that have no place in the sense, Chukei Ritzonecha, right? Like this idea of these statutes that Hashem says, just like do things and don't ask why, or more exactly, doing things that are insane, like going against the greatest army of the world with elephants and everything, with just a handful of Talmud scholars who don't even know how to fight. That's insane. So that's called going into the beyond the Seder Ishtalshlus of yourself. So how did this come out? So it's very interesting, the connection of the darkness to the light. It's like you wouldn't realize the darkness seems like something horrible and we have to push it away. But it's actually on the contrary. It was the darkness itself which triggered them to find this level of beyond the Seder Ishtalshlus in themselves. If it wasn't so dark, if they weren't up against an impossible odds, they never would have come out with such impossible powers from themselves. Because nothing would have triggered it. No one's going to, when times are good and you have an army and you can fight a normal war, you're not going to start becoming an invincible madman on the battlefield so easily, because there's nothing pulling that level of kamikaze out of you, right? So it was the darkness itself and how bad things got that made them have no other choice but to sort of say, like, just go mad and use anything and everything they had inside of themselves and bring out a masiris nefesh. So the darkness, that's what it means from below to above. The connection of this light to the darkness is from below to above, that the darkness itself is what caused the light to come out in the first place. And that's from below to above, because with the triggered from below, it triggered us. And through this, once a person finds his inner level of Ein Sof, so then Hashem says, I've got some of that, and He brings out the true Ein Sof, and therefore something beyond nature mamish happened. It happened over and over again. They won the war, they found the oil lasted miraculously. So Hashem, because they released the infinite inside of themselves, the impossible inside of themselves, the beyond the nature of their own selves, Hashem released the infinite beyond nature of Himself, and all of a sudden miracles were flying.
Does that have anything to do with the
Isn't that amazing, really?
dreams of Yosef beyond what we're thinking?
Everything has to do with the parsha that we're living in. There's the Shalah, and the Rabbi brings it like hundreds of times. The holiday that you're in is 100% directly found inside of the parshas. I don't know exactly how you're going to find it in the dreams, but for sure, there's a connection. It's not happening by chance. Anyway, so, yeah. That was from above to below. They drew down the Or Ein Sof. Lamata. No, sorry, that was that itself. So no, he's saying that whole experience of drawing the light forces you to find your infinite level, and then it reveals the infinite level from above. That's actually, that whole process is a below to above situation, because it comes from us. Lamai lamata. What does it mean from above to below? What's the association of this light to the darkness from a state of above to below? Sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you there. In other words, the fact that Hashem responded to Matisyahu's Mesiras Nefesh is still called below to above, because the whole reason that light came out is because of what he did. But then what's the idea from above to below, that the light has a connection with the darkness just purely from Hashem's point of view, is that Sha'al Yedei Or Zeh Me'irim Gam Es HaChoshech. Is that this light, suddenly when it comes out, it is the ability to make the darkness shine. In other words, that's not something that can happen from below to above. All you can do is be affected by the light and have the light trigger something in you. But the idea that this light, when its association with the darkness, is that this type of light, which is above the Seder Ishtalshelus, it has a relationship with the light that it's able to make darkness actually shine. It can actually shine up the night. So we'll have to hold here. But
It's a bit like Elul.
what's that?
Elul. You know how from below, from above?
Yeah. Shukaya.
Wow.
Oh, we sort of dropped off in the middle of that last point. We'll pick it up tomorrow. We ran out of time. Okay. You're heading out?
Yeah, my son's coming in from Toronto.
Awesome.
He's going to the army. We'll have at least 3 years, hopefully.
Right. Send them in, huh? Matisyahu Banav.
I mean, you know, just let you know if you're.
You know who else does that other than the Ishmaelites?
Who's that?
Is the Amish.
No, but they're just doing it for fun.
No.
They don't have like a mitzvah to do it. I'm saying from
No,
God.
I'm saying they throw people off the derrick, and then they say you have to have the free will to choose it.
Oh, they send them out.
Yeah, they send them out. And it's up to them if they want to be
I see.
room or not.
Interesting.
And it's a big problem for them because they get,
They get out there. They haven't seen like a telephone their whole lives, and all of a sudden they get all the.
Yeah, there's I met someone whose father was
But I lived most